finally getting
Hey.
to do this. This is great.
Yeah.
So you're on the East Coast?
Yeah, we're spending the summer in New York, which has been really nice.
You guys
Yeah.
are from the East Coast.
Yeah, yeah. So we're both from New York, different parts, but we're spending the summer with my husband's family at their country house upstate. Um, so yeah, we got here about a week ago and we're coming back to LA like middle end of September.
Beautiful. And is August like the best time to be out there?
Yeah, I mean,
Is it pretty
summer
warm?
here is nice. I mean, it's we kind of did it so that we'd be here for like a little bit of early fall because that's like my favorite time to be here, and we wanted to be here for some of the Jewish holidays, and we kind of like did our best to straddle like a couple things that we wanted, and it works.
And how is it, spoiler alert, traveling with your kiddos, the littles?
Oh my God. They actually are great on the plane. We did bring our nanny with us, full disclosure. We basically have, realized it takes at least three adults to go places with two infants. Not because of them. They're like angels and they're so adaptable. They like immediately adjusted to the time. They're great on the plane. It's just the sheer amount of crap required to like go from point A to point B. I
Yeah.
only have two hands and one of them at least needs to be holding a child. So it's a lot.
Yeah, and you have
It's a lot
double
of schlepping.
everything.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, great. Okay. So I'm super excited to have Carly Joseph, a surrogacy concierge and advocate who helps intended parents navigate the overwhelming world of third party reproduction with clarity, compassion, and her personal experience going through surrogacy to welcome her own two babies into the world after going through, I think you'll fact check me here, 8 rounds of IVF.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, we could just do 1,000 episodes on that,
Yeah.
and many losses, and ultimately a very tumultuous, challenging journey yourself. But welcoming a son and a daughter through surrogacy, Carly turned her personal journey into a professional mission. And through her concierge service, she offers guidance, education, and honest conversations about what it really takes to build a family this way. You've been featured on several podcasts. I was doing my research and are a trusted voice in the surrogacy space. Shout out, I was talking to an attorney and he threw your name out with like totally
Oh,
unprompted. And I was like, ah, I already talked to her. How incredible. Um,
love
so,
to hear
so
that.
giving you some props for that. And I'm excited to ask you a lot of questions that I've been wondering and also help our listeners better understand this process. You're kind of catching me at an interesting time as you know, since we first spoke a couple months ago, I'm in the process of trying to get this ball rolling as well. And even back a couple months ago, I feel like I knew absolutely nothing. I still feel like I barely know anything, but I'm light years away from even that point. So like the delta is, deep and wide. And so, yeah, I thought that we could start with, your personal story really brought you to, making this your life's mission and your work. So I thought we could start with kind of going back to square one. So
Yeah.
I
Let's
know
take
you
it
have a
back
very
to
complex
2020.
story. Yeah. Oh man, and like in so many ways, right? I know
Oh,
in
right.
general, yeah.
Like why 2020? Um,
Why was it all at the same time? Yeah.
all at the same time. That's kind of been the theme of my story. Thank you for having me. Very happy to be here. Um, yeah, so all the facts were correct. I did indeed do 8 rounds of IVF. It took some time. Summarizing a bit, going back to 2020, where it all began, it was COVID. Everything was crap. And I had been married for just a couple of months, and my husband and I started trying, and it wasn't working. And we started to do all the testing and all the things. And, we decided to do IVF with the suggestion of our doctors. And I kind of thought at the time, like, this really sucks. This is not what I wanted to be doing. But I just immediately thought, like, this is just a thing that I'm going to do. And then I will be pregnant, not the way that I wanted to be, but like, it will happen. Obviously, that could not be further from the truth. I don't think that's really how IVF goes for anyone. And that kind of was the beginning of what ended up being a very, very long saga for us. Basically, like the sort of common thread in my journey was that with every IVF round, we would try something new or different or tinker with the protocol a bit. And I kind of was getting like maybe one good embryo per round. And the truth is that, and I'm not a doctor, so I will say this, and maybe it's wrong, but I've been advised by a few different doctors that I've seen, because I've seen quite a few by now, that that's actually a decent result. And I'm really bad at math. I guess I was like 35 at the time. So I wasn't super young, and my AMH wasn't great. So like for my sort of place in life, I guess getting one embryo per round was not terrible. But for someone who wanted to have more than one child, it felt like a lot of input for very little result. A lot of money, a lot of insane hormones, a lot of like poor mental health, a lot of time wasted
Right.
waiting, feeling like shit. I mean, all the things. Um, And, we were kind of like under this impression that we sort of needed three embryos to even start transferring. And, a variety of different things happened during this
Hmm.
time. Like, we were like learning about my egg quality. We were learning about my husband's sperm. We were getting a COVID vaccine. My mom was sick and ultimately passed away during this time. So, like, there was just like, it was such a tumultuous, stressful, like, shitty time. And like, as it was unfolding, we were kind of like learning more about all the different things and how they were impacting us. But it didn't ever really feel like we were making progress, right? Like it was sort of like, okay, we'll like try this again, or we'll do a fresh transfer, or we'll try a mini IVF. And we kind of like always ended up back in the same place with one embryo. And then, we did start doing transfers at a certain point, and those all ended in loss. And it was kind of like, okay, so we're like trying so hard to make these embryos and then they're not sticking. And I'm summarizing a bit here, but that's kind of what like ultimately took us to the conversation around surrogacy. Interestingly, I think I always thought about my journey as like, well, if this isn't working, then like we'll need a surrogate or an egg donor. And I kind of thought that like that would be a choice, but obviously like most people either have like an issue with the eggs themselves and need to explore donor, or have an issue with, the environment, the uterus. That seemed to have been the case for me because I was making like one good embryo here or there. They were testing normal for the most part. So it seemed to be an issue with me. I later found out I had endometriosis. So at a certain point, my doctor said, like, I'm not ruling out pregnancy for you, but you're not younger. You're not getting younger. You're not young. You're not getting any younger. And
They love to say that, right?
yeah, I'm
You're
like,
not young.
thanks. I'm old as hell.
Yep.
And I am not making great embryos. So, like, let's stop wasting them, which was sort of like also an annoying conversation to have at that point
Oh,
after like having wasted some and like gone through
yeah.
transfers that didn't work. Do you know what I mean? Like, I was like, maybe I should have
Yeah.
thought about this a little bit before, but I
Yeah.
guess like I also wouldn't have been ready to like explore it at that point. I had to sort of get to a point of like, this feels insane. We have to try something different. That was kind of like that was a brief summary of sort of the IVF process, getting to surrogacy. I'll fast forward a little
Yeah.
bit just because we're on the topic of the IVF piece of it and how I came to surrogacy. Once we decided to explore a surrogate, we matched with our surrogate and had started like putting wheels in motion with a plan to transfer to her. And I did decide to do one more egg retrieval. And in my final
Oh,
retrieval, number 8, I made more embryos that were good tested than I did in all retrievals combined previously. And like my doctor, I hope she hears this podcast, or I've said this on other pods too. Like, she's so humble and amazing. And she called me and was like, this is bananas. Like, you're gonna think I'm giving you the wrong results. Like, I
oh.
don't know. Like we were like, what changed? And she was like, I don't know. Like, it's random.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I actually I saw that in one of your like IG lives or something and I was shocked. And I
that
was
was the
one
craziest
thing I
part of our whole
wanted
situation.
Yeah, and like one thing I for sure wanted to ask you about is like as a part of your decision to make to go towards surrogacy and go down that route, did you ever get like a diagnosis? And I remember hearing you talk about endometriosis. And had you had done the surgery prior to that last retrieval?
I had done the surgery, no, like 2 years before that retrieval. So
Oh
like
wow! So you had done other retrievals.
I did, yes. So I did the endo surgery like less than a year into our whole, maybe it was like about a year into our whole IVF sort of journey. And that was like another point at which I was like, oh, now we know why this isn't working. I'm going to have this surgery, then I'm immediately going to get pregnant. Also didn't
Sure.
happen.
Yeah.
Did the surgery. They decided to do a fresh transfer. Like, I think the theory with
Huh.
endo surgery is like strike while the iron's hot. Like, you just had the
Oh.
surgery, you've taken all this bad stuff out of your uterus, like, everything's quiet and peaceful and like ready to have a baby. And
Mm,
so, doing IVF actually like exacerbates the growth of the endometrial tissue that you don't
right.
want. So, I think my doctor's like thought process, like, again, I'm not quoting her on this by any means, but was like, let's not do too many hormones, meaning like a retrieval and then stop and then go into a transfer cycle with more hormones, but just try a fresh transfer. And I had like the
Mm,
worst retrieval cycle ever. And I only had one
yeah.
like maybe decent embryo that they used fresh, and I had nothing else to freeze after that. And it didn't work. And I couldn't, like, I didn't know why it didn't work because it wasn't tested or
Yeah.
anything. And so after that, I did more and more
Right.
retrievals. And
Wow.
I think actually by the time I did that last retrieval, like probably my endo was worse than it had ever been because that was the time between the surgery and that was the time where I did the most additional retrievals and transfers.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't know. I
Yeah.
really think it was random. Maybe there was something about like having my surrogate in my universe and like knowing that that was like a path that we were going to be on that took some of the stress and the pressure off. Maybe it was just like
Yeah.
random.
Yeah. Yeah. I've thought that too. Like, people like to tell you when you stop trying, it happens, those kinds of stories.
Yeah, and it's annoying.
And it's annoying, but there also may be some validity to just like the overall reduction in stress coming
Yeah.
down. Who knows? But regardless, it's an incredible result what you experienced. And you had done several rounds and had transfers that also failed or uh, chemical
I had a
pregnancy
chemical
too, right?
pregnancy, yeah, and some failed
Yeah,
transfers,
I'm
yeah.
so sorry. Like, first off, like, what the ringer you have endured. I'm so
Yes.
sorry for all of that.
Thank you.
Like, the whole thing and the loss and just like the constant needing to keep going. Like, I think it probably felt like impossible at points in time. And I heard you say, the definition of insanity, right? Like, I think you
Yeah.
mentioned that. And I was like, that has been ruminating in my head. Like, how do you get to this point? Like, to finally make these decisions. And you mentioned earlier at the top of this, like maybe you wouldn't have even been ready to make this decision, years prior because you sort of had to go through the motions. And I think we kind of all have to go through
Yeah.
whatever motions we have to go through to get to like a peaceful state where the way I've sort of been thinking about it is like surrogacy is to me like such a solution now instead of like a fail state.
Yeah.
And so trying like needing to make that mental shift. I'm curious, like once you had that, incredible IVF result, were you like, wait, did we solve it? Like, like how do you? Because I keep
Yeah.
feeling to my own self, my own story, like one more. Like did we do everything? Like, is there one
Yeah.
more thing we can try? And I'm still kind of in that phase. So I'm curious how you
Totally.
shifted
I don't know,
the
like,
view.
I don't know that I felt like we like cracked the code there. I think I definitely felt very fortunate and very validated that we had decided to explore surrogacy at that point because we also needed more embryos to like have room to work with a surrogate, right? So like
Right.
before that last round, our embryos were few and far between and not like amazing in quality. So it still felt like this tremendous amount of pressure of like, well, I really hope it works with the surrogate because then we've spent all this money and we've decided to go down this path that wasn't really what we wanted. And then like, what if? And like, we did encounter that. My surrogate did have two miscarriages before ultimately getting
Right.
pregnant. And so I don't know, like it's hard to separate hindsight, right, from like, how I felt in the moment. Now,
Mm-hmm.
looking back on it all, I'm like, of course I had to make many more embryos because I needed to have enough to sustain this journey with our first surrogate and then with our second surrogate. And that gave us the possibility to do it. And that experience on the whole was like absolutely net positive, like not, as you just said, like not a fail state, like a really good solution. And also like a very additive experience in my life. Like not just like, yes, thank God I could afford to and have access to working with a surrogate to have my family, but also like how lucky am I to have these relationships with these women and this like amazing gift that they gave us and a really cool story and now my business. Like it kind of is, it all worked out in a really nice way, but I did not feel that that was the case at the time.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
so I don't think I felt like we cracked it. I think that was like a really good piece of news,
Yeah.
but it didn't necessarily like change anything. Like we were committed to working with a surrogate at that point. It didn't make me feel like more of a desire to do another transfer to me. That was something I had still like been marinating on, but ultimately
Mm-hmm.
like the more I got into the surrogate process, the more I actually felt I was able to make peace with myself not carrying. Like the whole process of surrogacy was like very healing for me in that.
Oh, wow. That's wow. You like don't understand how incredible it is. I'm sure you do actually, because you talk to a lot of women like me. How incredible it is to hear that that's the experience you had. Because I think that's what I'm craving. Like
Yeah.
this, I
And
can
that's
just
not
let this
everyone,
part
but
go. Yeah. Yeah, but I
I hope it's
certainly
for
I
you.
want to. Yeah, thank you. I want to go into this stage, like kind of letting go of that, narrative and being open to whatever this experience brings
Yeah. And
me.
it's
Because
hard to
it's,
do that. Like
yeah.
I keep saying hindsight because I'm very aware of how like I'm making it sound so simple and easy. And like I
Hmm.
didn't feel like that at the time. But now that I've had some space from it, it absolutely was that.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, so at the time, kind of making this big change, how did you guys do that? Did you get counsel from folks like your doctor? Obviously, you and your husband had to chat through this. Like, how do you go from like, clearly putting yourself through a lot to try to get to this point of, pregnancy and a healthy baby, but to make that shift, like what was your
Yeah.
process to get there?
It was like a big pivot moment for sure. We had our last failed transfer to me um in June of 2022, I think. Yeah. And after that, I just was like, I need a minute. And by a minute, like a few months, and like took the summer off and like kind of, I'm not gonna say I didn't think about it. I thought about it a lot, obviously, but I wasn't like taking action steps. And we met with our RE, but in like a non-clinical setting. Like we met her in her office to just sit down and talk about like, okay, where do we go from here? Like, should we adopt? Should we do surrogate? Like, is there an egg donor
Mm-hmm.
conversation? We really didn't know what the options were. And she kind of said, like, I don't think I would say that you can never get pregnant, but I think it's hard. And I think you don't have a lot of embryos. So if I were you, I would explore surrogacy if that's an option. And she gave us the name of an attorney. And that was where we started. And that's part of why that was had such an impact on us. And part of why I advise people, clients, or even like potential clients who I'm just consulting with, talk to a lawyer. Like, they know everything. They've seen like the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that conversation was just very comforting for us because he kind of walked us through like what to expect, what are some misconceptions. We were kind of like starting out. We were like, we don't know anything about surrogacy. Should we be worried that someone's going to want to keep our baby? And that's just like
Yeah.
not really a thing that happens.
Yep.
And he just made us feel really comfortable with it. And I think we kind of like had a lot of big conversations and we were just sort of like, okay, let's try.
Yeah, I feel like the conversation with the attorney was like incredibly helpful. Because up until that point, like the surrogacy agencies that we had talked to, they're sort of selling as
Yeah.
well. You're having like a heart to heart with them because they're like, they understand what you've sort of been through, having had many other customers or clients rather. But I felt like the attorney, like you said, has such a perspective because they've seen kind of the whole, that
Yeah.
it was very comforting and also incredibly informative in me
Yeah.
getting started. Okay, before we get into the details of that, I wanted to ask too, because I think we probably share a similar thought on this, and I'm curious. You did many retrievals up front, or right? So like you kind of stacked them prior to starting trying transfers.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. What was the thought
Yes.
process behind that?
The thought process was originally my doctor had been like, we like 3 embryos per live birth. That was like
Yep. Mm-hmm.
her general guidance. And we were like, we know we think we want at least 2 kids. That was like as far as we
Yep.
could get. Um, and so we kind of wanted to bank embryos. And every time we had a good embryo and I really wanted to transfer because I was just like, I want to be pregnant, it was always like, well, what if
Right.
it
Like
doesn't
last
work?
year.
And then, yeah, and then we have to start over, and then I'm older, and then
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just kind of felt like it made sense strategically to like make the embryos, but and then we did that for a while, and then we started transferring, and then the transfers weren't working, so we did go back and make more embryos, and so we kind of did both, and it really didn't matter, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, I don't really think that like again, this is like not medical advice, but like I don't think a year makes a huge difference in this stuff. I kind of think like if there's issues, there's issues. Like you'll find out what they are and deal with them. But I don't think it was like getting the retrieval in like, before 6 months passed was like such a huge deal. But
Yeah, the mental state though is like you're hunkered down in that mental state of like doing all of the processes. So for me it
yeah,
also felt like more efficient, like I'm already here. I was talking with I see an acupuncturist, fertility acupuncturist who's like kind of also my fertility shaman. I feel like she's like a counselor to me. And one thing that we were chatting about too is like to prep for transfer is a whole other beast, and
yes,
we don't know what my body's going to do. And now we know I mean, I've not been through a transfer. I don't think I'll go through a transfer because of my situation, but to have to shift attention to the uterus when you like and go back and forth sort of like a ping pong if you have complications there, for me it felt like more just like I can focus in on one thing and be like hyper focused on this
yeah,
one
I think
thing.
that's right.
But even now, like hearing you talk, I'm like, yeah, the same challenges are facing me, and like Katie and I, she's on maternity leave, but we've even had the chats like, yeah, we have some embryos banked, but like, what if we need more? And then all of a sudden, I'm 38 this year. I'm gonna be, like my AMH
Yeah.
is going down. So thinking through that, you kind of also come at it, or I've come at it from a little bit of like a scarcity mindset too.
Yes.
Like, this is the best I'm gonna be.
Yes. 100%.
Yeah, it's hard to think about that. Like, what if, five,
But
couple
then
years
look, I
from
had
now?
my best retrieval like 2 years later. So
I know. The other thing
I
that's
and I
been
feel like
like,
that's a really annoying thing to say. Like if I was listening to this podcast and I was like somewhere in the early stages of my journey and I heard someone say that, that would irritate me because there's nothing like actionable or helpful in that.
mm-hmm,
But it was weirdly liberating, like the randomness of it all, because
mm,
one of our doctors at one point said to us, like, this is really more of an art than a science. And I think that's so true. And like, I think there's some randomness in that art in the sense that,
yeah,
like, all of the time that I spent, and I'm sure other people, do the same thing, like combing Facebook groups to find someone that had like the exact protocol as me and ask them, like, well, do you think if you did like 1 more ml of progesterone or Lupron at this time, to like, I don't think that makes like, it's not helpful. Like, trying to
yeah,
like hack the protocol or find like the doctor that does this one thing that's different. Like, I don't know. I just feel like that's like a way
yeah.
of sort of having control over a situation where you don't have any control.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I can't do those groups because
Oh my God, they're
it
brutal.
feels it feels exactly like that. We're being way too prescriptive for a situation that is far more random and out of our
Yeah.
control than we understand. But yeah, that resonates a lot. So as you are having this chat, this conversation, and you start on the surrogacy path, um, how did you find the person you worked with?
We also worked with a concierge service similar to what I
Oh,
do.
yeah.
That was recommended to us through our doctor. And she's kind of like inspired me to provide this service for other people. And so she started introducing us to surrogates. And, we were like, we didn't really have very many requirements. We didn't really know, um, you know, I guess what we should care about, what we wanted. We were just like, we want a woman who will like us to carry our baby and keep
Yeah.
him or her safe. And that was kind of it. And
Mhm.
so we met our wonderful surrogate on a Zoom call. And like by the end, I think we were all just like, okay, cool. What do we do? How do we start? Like, we were like, we wanted to
Yeah.
text her, we wanted to call her. It was just sort of like clicked.
That's incredible. I was curious why you went the surrogacy concierge route prior to obviously this now being your professional, space. Was it primarily from the doctor's recommendation or like being so overwhelmed by this new world you're like I need help? Like how did you kind of come to that?
Yeah, our doctor recommended it as one option. She wasn't like, this is what you need to do. But I think the biggest motivator for that was time. We just wanted to move
Mm-hmm.
fast. We felt like
Yeah.
we were behind. And I think a lot of people
Yeah.
feel that way when they start this process. Like they've already been at this for several years. Now they're here. So
Yeah.
that was the main driver for us for sure.
Yeah, it's by the time you get to this decision, you've already exhausted everything else and like you're
Hmm.
already feeling like, you're behind. Nobody's behind, right?
Of course.
But
But that's what
certainly
it feels like.
the feeling is really strong there.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of got to know her and got to work with her, you had another surrogate that came into the mix. So I'd love you to
Yes.
explain a little bit about how that process came to be.
People always like to ask us, like, did you plan this? No. It's a wonderful outcome, but it was not planned. Well, not exactly. So our first surrogate who we matched with, who I just mentioned, was wonderful and amazing, and got pregnant right away. And then at the second heartbeat appointment, there was no heartbeat. And so she had a miscarriage at about 9-ish weeks. And that was devastating, obviously, and like really complicated too, because like we had our grief about it, she had hers, there was guilt on both sides, and just, there was like a lot of feelings to be tended to. And she was amazing and wanted to try again, and we tried again. And it was a similar situation a little earlier, but another loss. And so at that point, we didn't want to give up on her, and we were willing to do a third transfer, which was part of our contract, and she was game for it, which honestly she was such a trooper because she had been through now these two losses, and we were kind of like not feeling super optimistic about it, but didn't want to wait until potentially several weeks into pregnancy to discover that it was not going to work again, to then find somebody else. So we were like, let's just look for a second surrogate now and like, start that process. And so that's what we did. And so we did a third transfer with our first surrogate, and it worked. But like we never felt like it worked enough to feel good about it, to say like, okay, well, we're not going to proceed with the other surrogate, because after that many losses and everything we had been through, we were just like, we'll only feel safe when the baby is born and healthy, and we get to that point. So when she was about 5.5 months pregnant, we did a transfer to our second surrogate, and we knew like, okay, we're gonna have these babies like really close in age. It's a little crazy, but we're gonna do it. And then to add another layer of complication to the story, our second surrogate, her water broke at 34 weeks, or I'm sorry, at 29 weeks. So she went to the hospital, and they were like, probably you will have this baby in the next 7 to 10 days, which was terrifying for us. We also had a 3 and change month old at home. Um, but luckily, the
Wow.
baby stayed inside, and then they induced her at 34 weeks. That's kind of like protocol for that. So they are a little closer even than we bargained for. 17 weeks to the
Right.
day. So yeah, I have my daughter is 8 months today, actually. And my son will turn 1 on Thursday.
It's incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah, my mom used to say that 2 under 2 was just so hard, and you have 2 under 1.
I do.
Crazy.
Yeah,
That's incredible. I've thought about like, well, what if that were to be the case? And I'm just like, it's so unlikely. Like, if that's the case, then like that's just it. Just
that
the
was kind of how I
universe has
felt.
provided. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I was like, this is crazy. I'm going to be so tired and so stressed. And yes, all of that is true. But like,
Mm.
this is it.
And our stories just really just become they're so unique to us. So
Yeah,
yours is just particularly unique.
it's very
It's
unique.
crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of the mom podcasts want you on to talk about like how the heck you manage to like
Ugh,
the extended newborn
I don't
phase
have an
and like
answer. A lot of help.
yeah, certainly. And thank you for sharing about the process to find both surrogates. But I was curious, knowing that you went through losses with your first surrogate, I think this would be a common thing that, something certainly I am nervous about. Like,
The real hurdle in surrogacy in terms of process and managing loss and navigating all this stuff is like there is really like a extremely significant financial commitment at a certain point, and that kind of
mm,
drives a lot of the decisions. So in our case, like, we were contractually obligated to this agency and this surrogate. In our contract, we agreed to do 3 transfers. Obviously, anyone can say, like, I don't want to proceed. We can't force her to do a transfer. We didn't know if she would want to continue with us,
sure.
and go through potentially another loss, which was physically and mentally like super draining and terrible for her. Um,
Yeah.
but honestly, I probably would have felt pretty differently if I hadn't had all of those additional embryos, but we had more embryos to work with at that point, and
Hmm.
our options were either like after the second failed transfer, let the agency rematch us with someone different, which could take up to 6 months potentially to find, or try the third transfer, which is like incrementally at that point, like not a lot of extra money. It's just the fee to the
Hmm.
clinic for the transfer. And if it doesn't work at that point, then get rematched. So we were like, we might as well just try one more time. And that was kind of how we made the decision. But
Yeah. It's a
there was
good,
never ever a part of me that like didn't trust her or felt like it was her fault or anything like that. It was just like navigating so many like unknowns and probabilities of like, well, what if this and what if that? And
right, right. Yeah. And it's such a good flag, too, uh, that you sort of always want to just hurry the process up. Yeah, everything takes an extraordinary amount of time, even
yeah,
if you were to start all over. And that also comes with its own new risks and unknowns. And it's not like that person will not also have other things going on or,
exactly.
things might not work out with them. But it's a hard trade off. Like, I feel like you're constantly prioritizing and making trade offs as you go
Yes,
through this process against also what, like, intuitively you want and like what your intuition is saying, or what rather maybe also what your fears are saying.
yeah.
Yeah, how to keep the process moving and to make those decisions is really really challenging. And did they also both know like that both surrogates are pregnant at the same time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we disclosed to both sides. I mean, we had to.
Sure. Yeah.
We wanted them both to be super on board with it and not like, you know, it wasn't to me, there was no negative. I understood that the second surrogate was like, I would only care if that would make you less likely to want to like continue with me at a certain point if she got pregnant. And I was like, no, we're all in. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
go
We're
big or
doing
go
it.
home. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that both babies are good and healthy despite like
Yeah.
the scary time it took to get them here.
Yeah, we feel very lucky. And now, I mean, it's like you spend all this time trying to have them, and now I'm like, okay, now we have to keep them alive and well.
Yeah, and like
Also,
keep
very hard
yourself
work.
alive and well.
Yes.
So I was thinking that it would be interesting to talk kind of like surrogacy 101, like the process. We touched on a few of these things just hearing your own story. Like they're the common things that we all have to go through as we start looking at navigating this for lack of a word, process. I'd love to
Yeah,
find like a better word. Like
I
journey
know.
doesn't feel good to me either because it's
I
like
know.
too positive. Roller coaster, maybe like hurricane. I don't know. Like it's like
All. Yeah, I don't know.
all of the
There's not
above.
a good word for it.
Yeah. But as the expert in the room, you've helped so many women and intended families, do you
Yeah.
call them intended families? I know intended parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Intended parents. Either.
Navigate this. The very first step, like obviously deciding you want to do this, but once you've kind of made that decision, would you say the first thing, like what would you suggest somebody how they get started?
I mean, I'm biased, so I would tell them to talk to
Yeah.
me. But
Yeah. Well, we talked
um,
to you and
yes.
we caught you just like just after we had already started down the road a little bit and I was like and we went back and forth a little bit and you are an incredible resource.
Oh, I'm
Um,
so
if
glad.
everyone can have a Carly to talk to when they're trying to make these decisions, that would be incredible.
Yeah, and I do consults with, anyone that is interested and is serious about, learning more, and I'm happy to share resources and education. I think like, me or someone like me is a great place to start, just to sort of like understand the landscape and, the different sort of ways of approaching this process, whether it's with an agency, with a concierge, independent, whatever. I think speaking to an attorney really early on is a really good idea. Not everyone knows kind of like how to even find one or start there. So I do, offer those resources to people if they want. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about who your lawyer should be and depending on
Mm,
the state that your surrogate is in and all of that, but um I don't really agree with that. I think finding someone that you feel comfortable with and who most likely can represent you at least, to a point, and then maybe there needs to be local counsel added into the mix, I think is a really good place to start. And talking to other intended parents, I think that's like probably the best. Those are like the three main points of where to begin. There is the world of Facebook, of course. The groups on surrogacy are actually, I find them way more helpful and resourceful than the fertility groups because it's really more about facts. Have you worked with this agency? The downside of the groups is that, then you get into the agency reviews, and like anything in life, any good business will have good and bad
mm,
reviews. Surrogacy,
yeah.
fertility, it's so emotionally loaded. So like no one who didn't get pregnant but like had a decent experience with an agency is going to go on Facebook and write a review and say like, I think this agency is great, but it didn't work out for us. Like you're going to really hear the stories, on opposite ends of the spectrum. So I just say take that stuff with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of where I'd begin.
Yeah. What are some of the key decision points around going through an agency versus a concierge? And maybe you can talk a little bit about kind of how the approaches are different.
Yeah, I mean, working with me is just, going to give you a faster match and potentially a more qualified match. And what I mean by that is not, you know, I'm very pro agency. I match people, just to be clear, I match parents with surrogates who are already working with an agency. So I match you with a surrogate and an agency basically at the same time, and then you work with that agency. Um, I work with agencies, my clients work with agencies. Agencies are super important. They're responsible for all of the heavy lifting of recruiting and screening surrogates. I do not do
Mm,
that. If you work with me, the easiest way to explain it is like if you're single and you're dating, you don't say like, should I be on Bumble or on Hinge? Or I haven't been single in many years now, so I don't know the other ones that are out there. But like when I was single for a long time, I did all the apps. Like I wanted to
mm,
cast as wide of a net as possible. And that's what I do with surrogate agencies. Um, Within reason. I don't work with every agency. I take a lot of pride in who I do work with. I spend a lot of time getting to know the agencies that I work with and getting to know their programs and what they do and how they do it. And so by doing that and then getting to know my clients, I can create a match that is probably a bit more aligned than someone who
mm.
is like sitting on a wait list and just waiting for the next, not best, but the next available surrogate that agency in particular has, who might be mostly aligned with what they're looking for, but might not be like a great match, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I feel from my own experience, having interviewed quite a few agencies and having talked to you, and we got started with an agency. And I will say now down the line, I'm finding things about their process that I wish I would have known up front. for better or worse. And those things I think are hard. Like you wouldn't know them in advance, right? If
Right.
you didn't have somebody who already went through it, or and even then may have I talked to somebody who went through the agency we're going with, and our experiences have been vastly different for many reasons, right? The people that
Right.
we're matching with are different, our clinics are different, the person, the coordinator is maybe different. And so I do feel like that's a big value point where, man, I wish I understood the full, like, I wish I could have looked months in
Yeah.
advance and seen at this point in time what would it have been like. And so maybe before I get to the questions around that, I would be curious to know too, like there are different ways that the agencies work with you up front,
Yes.
right? Like, so you were mentioning your way, you're looking at the concierge model, you're looking at what the intended parents are looking for and finding that like sweet spot between the three things, right? Intended parent, the surrogate, and the agency that they're connected with, so that hopefully those things kind of come into harmony with each other
Exactly.
and things can move forward. And then you also mentioned, and I think this is an important call out for folks who are just kind of learning about this because it's something I've learned pretty quickly. Some agencies you pay up front and then you're on the list, right? And you're on a wait
Wait
list,
list. Yeah.
and we'll call you when we have somebody who meets your checklist of things that
Criteria.
you fill
Yeah.
out and criteria in the application. And then the alternative is what I found is you can kind of browse many different agencies, right? Like they sort of have like a dating profiles almost of people that are on their site, and then you're doing sort of this screening yourself. Could you talk a little bit about the models that you've seen and maybe the pros and cons there?
Yeah. I mean, every agency is completely different. There are no two that are exactly alike. They're all really different in the way they approach matching, maintain wait lists. People always ask me like, am I going to see the same surrogate if I reach
Mm,
out to one agency directly versus if I work with you and you're talking to them too? And the answer is I don't know, because I don't know how every agency, like what their secret sauce is, or how, how they,
mm-hmm.
decide who to match who with. I think the right way to do it is to think about what are the best matches. Like you want to match the surrogate with the intended parents that make the most sense, I think, regardless of where they are on a wait list. I don't think that's really like
Yeah.
a appropriate way to, approach this process.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everyone does it a little bit differently. Yes, to your point, like one model is a paid wait list. Sometimes it's a refundable paid wait list. Sometimes they let you just look at the profiles directly. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's like a here are the three different models. I think like probably
Mm.
there are 40 plus different models, if not more.
Great.
Um, and that's one of the main reasons also that, people choose to work with someone like me, because it's exhausting to do this research.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to like create a spreadsheet of like, you know, comparison points, because none of them are apples to apples and you don't really know what you're comparing. And I mean, I don't know. I had a full-time job and I was going through all of this. I certainly didn't have the
Mm-hmm.
bandwidth to do that exercise. So, I think
Yeah.
that's helpful to have assistance with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like anything in the infertility journey, if you are also working or have
Yeah.
honestly any other responsibility, regardless,
Yeah.
it's another full time job
Yeah.
to get care and get yourself moving along. Um, when you so once you kind of match with someone, or actually prior to even matching, right? Once you have like a potential match with someone, you go into the first step is the call, right?
Yep.
In most cases, you may or may not have already put down a deposit with that agency to even get that call. Um, so
Yeah.
we're
So
not even touching on like the financial impact of the
yeah, I
process.
don't I don't really work with agencies that require a financial commitment before a confirmed match. So
Mm,
for the most part in my work, I share profiles with clients. Their doctor will review the medical records, and if they're comfortable with them, we'll do a match call. And sometimes those things happen in different order, but um, before they have to financially commit, they know that their doctor has seen the records and they've met the person and want to proceed, and the surrogate also wants to proceed. So um,
yeah.
there's a
And I
lot of
think
known information before money goes down.
I think this is such an important point, and something I didn't know up front, or didn't like clock. I'm sure you explained this to me when we talked, but didn't clock the importance of this rather. So like a big lesson learned for my own journey is like the medical record review didn't happen till after the
Mm,
call, and like I do think there's a huge opportunity to improve that process just overall. Like why is it that you have this call, like then you have this call and then you have like a time clock that starts on that person because they're also up for matches with someone else,
yeah.
and now your clinic is sort of under the time pressure to make a
Stress. Yeah.
decision, as are you, to weigh the clinic or your doctor's review and your own feelings about whatever they tell you, whatever the learnings are. I found that to be like a very disorienting part of the process, like a very frustrating part of the process. There was a
Yeah.
lot of friction there.
Yeah, that does happen, and I won't lie,
Yeah.
like that happens with me sometimes too. Like there's only so much that I can do. I try to like, you know, be a middleman there and smooth it out, but there are different ways that this scenario can play out. Ideally, like the
Mm-hmm.
doctor quickly reviews the records and then you have the call, but sometimes like if it does take weeks, and some clinics take weeks to review records, then you kind of have to do the
Yeah.
call in the interim, because there's no point in making the surrogate wait to do the call if then the records are going to be denied. So then you have this call, but
Mm.
then the time clock starts and they can't really hold surrogates. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's very disorienting. There is a lot of hurry up and
Mm-hmm.
wait in this process, but there is also like a time clock on these decisions, and it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah. The time clock that we're talking about too is, once you meet that person, they put them on hold sort of for you to make a decision, but it's pretty quick, right?
Yes,
Then
it
you
could
have to
be
sort
like
of make
24
that decision
hours.
to move forward. Yeah, and I don't know that people like realize that. Like I certainly didn't. That didn't quite sink in.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that is so fast. And like
Yeah.
to move to the next stage, you're now putting up money,
A
to
lot of
put
money.
sort of like a lot of money with the
Yeah.
agency. Like once you match with that person, like actually decide you both want to go forward, you're putting up money to the agency. You're often establishing the escrow account. At least that was in my
Yeah.
experience. Is that pretty common next step?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Every
Yeah.
agency has different requirements for what has to happen when and exactly how much money goes where when, but yes, like immediately at a confirmed match, you'll open escrow and fund it. And yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah. And
very
the
fast and
escrow,
very expensive.
yeah, and the escrow accounts are that is what will eventually pay the surrogate throughout the
Yeah.
process. So which is a good process, right? So you're not like writing checks directly to
Yes.
a person.
And it's
There's some
protected,
formality.
and yeah.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask about the call because I think, do you join some of these calls?
I join all of them, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then I have to ask you questions about this because
Please hit me.
um, the the call piece, the first like match call, I guess. Man, I found it to be so uncomfortable. like,
Yeah. It's
and
awkward.
it's so awkward. And I'd love to know, how do you prep people for this call? Like, what should people think about in advance prior to jumping on? And I'll share a little bit about my experience. Our very first call, um, I was really shocked by how like sort of clinical it was in the beginning. I felt we didn't really connect. Like there was no like real hi, hello, who are you?
Right.
And we just jumped right into these, pretty like
Hard-hitting questions.
sensitive questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the surrogate. And then she got to, say a couple words about who she is, like an intro, and then they threw it to me, and I remember being like, I don't even know how to like what to say because
Yeah.
hi, I'm Amy, and when I left that call, I had a big learning that like, okay, I did not know what I wanted to get out of this, and I didn't know what I wanted them to take away from
Hmm.
this. Like, what were the top two things I really cared about? Those were some of like the reflections I had. Was like, okay, you're not going to be able to get into the whole story. Figure out how much of this do you want someone to understand and take away from. And so the next call I went into, I had
You were
sort of
read
not
better.
rehearsed, but like I knew what I wanted to get out of this, like what temperature check I wanted to get. And that might be different for different people. Like for me, it became, I think, is something you said earlier really resonated. After that first call, I realized, no, I need to have an emotional IQ check with this
Yeah.
person. Like, are we on the same wavelength? What is that? Like, really treating it almost like a first date.
Yeah.
Whereas that first call we had, like, it was so monotone and like clinical, and I didn't get any gut vibe check. And it turned out to be a really bad match anyway. Like, long story there. I can tell you later.
Yeah, I want to hear
Yeah,
about that.
yeah. So I'm curious, like, how do you prep someone? Like, how do they figure out what matters to them when they go into that call? Because it's sort of like you get one shot. You get one
Yeah.
30-minute call, and then you have to make a decision. Like,
Yeah, so much to
pass
say
go.
on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of information and decision making based on very little information,
Mm-hmm.
essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a couple ways to answer that. I mean, I'll start more broadly. One of the things, and I feel like I say this every time I like talk about
It's
myself, and I
okay.
feel like it's getting a little tired and trite, but it's true. The best advice that I ever got in our journey was from our attorney, and he basically said something along the lines of like, you can put everything you want in a contract. At a certain extent,
Mm.
it's not, enforceable, and you have to have trust. And it's like all based on trust. And I think that was like really what drove me to say yes to the match, like in my own matches and what I advise my clients. Um,
Mm.
and I think it's exactly what you said, like having that EQ check. Like, does this feel, it's still going to feel awkward, but like, do
Mm-hmm.
you feel like this is someone who you can see yourself building trust with, who seems to have like good values that you align with, who seems to make good decisions based on like what a day in their life looks like, what their lifestyle is like? Do you feel comfortable with the things they're saying and the things they're not saying and how they're talking about themselves? Like I always urge people to kind of think about these calls and focus less on the like, well, what did she say about her termination stance? And more on like,
Mm.
does she seem like a person you want to be in an intimate relationship with for the next 15 to 18 months? Because that's really what it is.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, the agency, as you pointed out, or whoever's facilitating the call is going to ask those like heavy questions. Most of them you kind of like, know the answers to some extent beforehand, like what the hot topic issues are. So then coming back to your true question of how do I prep people, the prep is usually somewhat extensive and we kind of identify, well, like what are the flags? What are the things that maybe we don't feel like we might not be aligned on? What do we want to really make sure? What do we want the surrogate to know about you? What,
Mm-hmm.
we go through all of those things and we kind of walk through like what the call might look like, how it's going to feel, what are we going to talk about? Honestly, every
Mm-hmm.
call is a little bit different, and there's only so much I can prepare someone for it because I don't know the surrogate ahead of time. So I don't know what they're bringing
Right.
to the table. Usually I know the agency person that's going to be on the call, but these dynamics change with every single call. So I've
Mm-hmm.
seen match calls with so many different ranges of emotion, and everyone is different.
Yeah.
And some are super warm, and some are like more transactional and cold feeling. And sometimes I'm like, I think it's definitely no. But then both parties are like, yeah, that was great. And you're like, okay, that works for them,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
Like I'm a person
Yeah.
too, so I have like my expectations of like what would feel good for me, what I wanted in my match calls. But yeah, they're all a little bit
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. I think that's such a good takeaway to have on this is like work through it a little bit, like sort of like almost like rehearse a little bit, like what do you want out of this, and where do you think your red flags or sort of your blockers would be, and I think, yeah, I did think through those things, but what I was really shocked by was like that feeling of like I didn't get the gut check feeling,
Yeah.
and then I still felt like, oh, she meets all the other requirements, so like maybe we should move forward with her
Yeah.
anyway.
But the
And
gut
I think I
feeling is
came
so
out.
important. You have to
Yeah,
trust it.
thank you for saying that, because I think that like what I guess I'm trying to get at is, through so much of, I think, the infertility, experience. I don't know about you, but like you're constantly feeling like, or I'm constantly feeling like, like the scarcity mindset of like, yeah, I'm just grasping to like make things work,
Yeah.
and trying everything. And moving to surrogacy, I think the same mentality was still there. Like I didn't know what I could want or ask for, what I was even allowed to have expectations about, more on like the kind of emotional heart to heart side of the process until saying no to that first person and then moving to the next and having a completely wildly different experience made me realize like, oh, that exists for me. Like the thing I was
Yeah.
looking for exists for me. It feels very much like dating
Yeah.
actually in that regard. Like,
And we've
you're
all
trying
been on
so hard to make
dates
this thing work.
with people that are like on paper perfect, right? And you just like don't feel
Yeah.
it. And it's the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, totally. So once you get to you both decide to move forward, you get to the match. Um, Rapid fire, like the next stuff is like a hurry up and wait, right? Again, it's like,
Yeah, sort of. So, like, once your doctor's reviewed records and you have had the call and you have a confirmed match and you've opened escrow and like decided to move forward, then you got to schedule the surrogate to come in for medical screening. And so it
mhm,
is like hurry up and get escrow and do these things and whatever. But then sometimes you're waiting like a month or two because you're waiting on her cycle or a scheduling issue or your doctor's availability or whatever it is. So it's
mhm,
like make sure we do all these things so that we don't miss a cycle, but then you still might miss a cycle. And
mhm,
so it's, medical screening in person. So that's usually a saline sonogram, blood work, whatever other exam things the doctor wants to do in person. And then legal. So
mhm,
every attorney, will quote sort of different time frames. And I think it just depends on, the surrogate and, where you are in the whole process. But I usually say like around 2 months for contracts, give or take. And
mhm,
then once that's complete, then you can start thinking about planning a transfer. So whenever anyone comes to me and says, like, how quickly can you match me? Obviously, my answer is it completely depends on what you're looking for. But then the next question is usually, well, how quickly can I transfer after you do match me? And I kind of think like 4 to 6 months from a confirmed match to transfer is like a generally reasonable timeline to expect. But there's just always things that come up that you don't plan for.
right. And then something might come up in the medical
You just don't
screening
know.
that they
Yeah.
have to go through. Is it common? At which point do people like often meet each other actually? Like, is it common for people to meet at that
In
medical screening
person.
appointment in person? Yeah, or is that
Um,
totally different depending on the situation?
every journey is a little bit different. I think like a lot of times there's like a general thought that, you shouldn't meet in person until after medical clearance because if she's not medically cleared, if the results come back and it's not a good fit, then you've met her and become like emotionally invested and attached. That's how I was advised. I don't know that now I agree with that. Like, I think it depends on what your
Mm,
personal like bandwidth is for like emotional disappointment. I don't think
mm-hmm.
for me, I don't think I would have felt more disappointed let me say this in a better way. I would not have felt less disappointed if I had a surrogate that I matched with and then really liked and she didn't pass medical clearance. I don't think there would be a part of me that'd be like, well, at least we didn't meet her in person, so, I'm not that attached. I felt very connected to
Mm-hmm.
my surrogate like on a call, like at
Yeah.
first meeting. So um, anything would have been disappointing. So I think like, if the surrogate will come to your fertility clinic generally for the screening, and if it's convenient for you to go and meet her, like I don't think there's anything wrong with that if she's comfortable with it. It depends on the agency, the surrogate, the doctor, all of it.
Yeah, the whole thing. And then as, assuming like all of that goes well, are there and you get to contracting, any major lessons in contracting? Like I've been given some advice like put everything you want in the contract. But then the rational side of my brain is like, yeah, but like it is all based on trust. So like
Yeah, that
how,
was my approach, and that's generally my ethos on this stuff. I mean,
mm,
generally my ethos is like talk to your lawyer and like defer to what your lawyer suggests based on the situation or
sure.
like what they are worried about or whatever. Um, I think, look, I have clients that like, want a surrogate who will only eat organic or, have some lifestyle modifications. And the reality is that there's no compliance for those things. But like, if that's
Mm-hmm.
what you really want and it's really important to you, of course you can find someone who you can trust to make those accommodations for you, especially if you're like facilitating them happening, whether it's paying for the food or getting them whatever the things are that you want them to be using. I didn't feel the need personally to like exert that level of control because I didn't feel like it was like authentic in the sense of like this is another person making her own choices in her own life. Like there has to be room for that. Like I can't I mean, some of the things I do are crazy. So like I can't expect that someone else is going to do the same crazy things that I would do to, keep a baby safe. And I'm also coming to the table with a lot of trauma that this person doesn't have. So um
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
y-
And
you
maybe
know,
not wanting to impart that trauma on this
yeah.
person who you're like just hoping
Yeah.
has a safe and healthy pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I've been thinking about as we get closer to that. But ultimately, what I realized for me was the most important thing in the call to like get across was, hey, the most important thing to me is that the baby is grown in a happy and healthy
Yeah.
environment. And that's what coming to the table with. All this other
Yeah.
stuff that I like also matters. I realize like when it all comes down to it, for me, I think that's where it sort of the accumulation of all of that stuff kind of came down to like,
Yeah.
are you happy, healthy, and safe? Therefore, baby will be happy, healthy, and safe.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's like, if I had to like sum it up, that's like exactly how I feel about the whole thing. I would just add to that that like I think a complicating factor in that sort of conceptual way of thinking is that
Mm,
that is a very subjective
totally.
thing to
Good point.
evaluate. And so
Good point.
I have a lot of clients who will look at a profile and be like, "Oh, this surrogate is way too stressed for me because she's a single mom with three kids and she also has a side hustle." And I totally get that that would feel really stressful for someone, for that person. But like what is stressful for you is not stressful for someone else and vice versa. And every human being,
Mm-hmm.
like, metabolizes stress differently. And I always encourage people to like, if it feels like someone could be a good match and you just like think they're too stressed, like let them tell you what their stress is like. Have a call, ask them.
Yeah.
Look, only have a match call with someone who you intend to proceed with, in good faith, but don't write them off on paper because they seem too stressed for you. Let them tell you
Good
about how
point.
they deal with stress and what their support system looks like and what their village is made up of and how they
Mm.
tackle things. I don't know. I'm pretty type A. I'm like a pretty like chaotic, stressed out person, but like I don't feel too stressed out. But like someone could easily
Yeah.
look at what I'm doing and be like, "Oh my God, like how is she doing those things?" But like it works for me. And that's like probably true of most people.
That's such a great lesson too, that like we are individual
Yeah.
people, and to bring that mentality in, like they are also an individual, unique person
And
as
give
you go
them
through
room
it.
to be that. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is all the upfront work, and
Yeah.
then you get to transfer. Hopefully, everything is, hopefully you get a positive pregnancy test, and you start the I guess you get on the journey really kicks off in that way. And the clock to birth hopefully starts. But how do people make decisions around like communication? And obviously, that's something you probably want to check or get a temperature check on in the call and the match call as well. But like communication, seeing each other, going to their appointments, like deciding
Yeah.
which appointments to go to. I've heard you talk about like really only going to the major ones, and I certainly at the start am like, oh, I want to be at everything, but
Yeah.
now I'm kind of like, do I really need to be at everything? I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's something that you kind of know a little bit about at the beginning and then it like
Mm.
evolves. So like I think for those intended parents who like want to be really transactional, which is pretty few and far between. I think they kind of
Mm.
know that up front, and that's something that they can disclose. And same goes for the surrogate. I think mostly all parties want to be communicating regularly. Like it's an exciting thing to
Oh.
be talking about. I think that most surrogates don't want to be micromanaged, meaning like they don't want intended parents who are like, it's 7 a.m. Are you awake yet? What are you going to have for breakfast? Like that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't feel good to anyone. I think what you expect, or if you don't know what you expect in terms of communication and what you think you might want, is discussed in the match call. And I think you kind of like find your rhythm in your relationship as it builds over time. That's the kind of nice part about like having several months before the transfer is like you kind of wait and go through these other processes together, and then you kind of can start building
Mm,
that relationship. And sometimes you'll see each other a lot, depending also on your location and how many appointments you go to and that kind of thing. Just really varies so much case by case, like who the people are, what their professional, lives look like, if they have other children, all of those things.
yeah, it feels like, you're just really, you're putting it out there and you're really hoping it gets returned. And
Yeah.
then as you sort of have to kind of figure out like the norms, like it's norming, storming, and forming again, right? That's kind of what I've noticed too. I'm like itching to get our surrogate's phone number, but like we're still pre-contracting, so no one will give it
Yeah.
to me.
You'll be
I'm
there.
like,
You'll be
I don't
there
want to talk to
soon.
her. Yeah. Um, you've also talked about like first time versus repeat
Yeah.
surrogate. And I appreciated your perspective on this. I think you mentioned like, there are pros and cons, I guess, or rather than pros and cons, there's really just like, I guess there's some benefits to both and not necessarily cons. But yeah, what would you advise there?
Repeat surrogates are much more expensive, and some people feel like
Mm,
they're proven and they've been through it
right.
before and therefore are a better option. So, I mean, I think it just depends on what your priorities are in terms of like what is driving your decision making. If you're looking for a pretty straightforward way to cut some of the cost of this process, I think working with a first time surrogate is a great option. I don't really see a
Mm,
downside. Yes, a surrogate who's done it before has proven that they can carry a baby that's not genetically theirs, but like still
sure.
things can happen. I think there's risks, in both cases. I don't know if there's data, to support either case. If there is, I'm not aware of it, but I can't speak to that. But I think there's something special about a first time surrogate, like going through the process together for the first time. I don't think you can
Yeah.
go wrong either way.
Yeah, I've liked the way you put that. There is certainly a cost implication,
Yeah.
but I think it's often been framed as like the repeat surrogates know the process and they know what to expect, and your first time surrogate doesn't, so you're going to run into friction there. But the alternative of that is this first time surrogate is also in the trenches with you, is also nervous and committed, and there's like also a beauty in building that
Yeah.
relationship as
You have that
well.
commonality of like you're both doing it together.
Yeah, so I appreciate that perspective.
Uh,
So I guess maybe I'll wrap with I've heard you talk about your surrogates with such appreciation. And if you were talking to yourself when you first started going down this route, what advice would you give to someone who's looking to build such a good relationship with that person through the whole process, like even through loss and the challenges of going through all of that together? I think that experience is just so unique. Well, maybe not as unique as we think it is, but what kind of advice would you give to someone who's really like focused on building a good relationship through the whole
yeah, I love this
process?
question. Such a like nice thought. Because I don't think a lot of people think about it like that. They think just about like the
Mm,
end goal. But it really is a
sure.
journey for lack of a better word. I think really just be generous in terms of like the space and the grace that you give yourself and to your surrogate. Like know that you are both coming to the table and to this experience together with very different histories, very different
Mm,
like expectations and or lack of expectations and like desires and goals. Like yes, there is this amazing shared goal that's very much aligned, but also like you have different lives, you're working with someone ideally who's, never had trouble getting pregnant. Maybe you've had a ton of trouble getting pregnant. There's just a lot of different sort of things going on for each person. And if there is loss and, challenge along the way, like you will each need to have space to process that and to help each other process it. And so just like giving everyone some grace and, the room to get through it the way they need to.
I love that. That rings true. As
Easier said
I'm
than done.
going into easier said than done, but a good North Star as we
Yeah.
go through this experience, which is ripe with lots of challenges. Well, I just want to thank you so much for jumping on with me
My
and giving
pleasure.
us a breakdown of Surrogacy 101, like how we get to this place, how we get through this. And I got to tell you, Carly, like starting down this road several months ago and being terrified and like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, to actually now one foot in front of the other doing it. It's because of women like you who've shared their
Oh,
stories. Like one of my old girlfriends, getting her on the phone, she broke it down for me, talking to you, women who've actually taken the steps and gone through the fires, I guess.
yeah.
So thank you for doing that. It's such a service to all of us, and you're passing it
It's
forward, and
my
so
absolute
appreciate it.
pleasure, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about everything.
Well, good night to your kiddos. And
Thanks.
I hope you have an amazing rest of your East Coast summer.
Thank
And
you.
I'll
I will
talk to you
text you. We'll
soon.
catch up soon more
Yeah,
personally. Okay,
I'll do
sounds
that.
good.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks.